Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. Today I'm speaking with Glenn G. from the Beaches Agnostics group in Atlantic Beach, Florida. Glenn tells us his story and how the We Agnostics, Atheists, and Freethinkers International AA Convention helped inspire him to get involved with starting a new secular AA group. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, Glenn, thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to have you here.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
I guess what I like to do when I talk to people is, first of all, try to get to know them a little bit. And a good way in AA to get to know somebody is just to let them tell their story a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that might be a good way for you to kind of segue into starting your group and some other things. So you just want to kind of start and tell us about your journey into Alcoholics Anonymous?
Absolutely. Be my pleasure. And I'll start in a traditional way. I am Glenn. I am an alcoholic. I am an addict also. And my sobriety date now is June 7th, of 2009. My home group is Beaches Agnostics and Freethinkers here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. But the story goes a lot further back than then. I am a child of the 60s, and during the 60s and early 70s, recreational drug use turned into addictive drug and alcohol use, and that went on for a period from probably 1969 until June of 1989. And after multiple run-ins with the law and treatment centers and many other things, I finally reached that magic bottom in June of 1989. And I just gave up, for lack of a better description. And they sent me off to jail for a little while, and then they sent me to a long-term inpatient rehab, the kind of which we don't really have around anymore. Mm-hmm. And it was absolutely what I needed and helped save my life. My bottom and early recovery started with a religious experience. And it was, thank you, Jesus, for my toothbrush. Thank you, Jesus, for my toothpaste. Thank you for this day. Let me memorize some scripture. And I was all changed, saved, and ready to go. And luckily, I got exposed to some professional counselors while incarcerated, who immediately red flagged me and said, whoa, this is going to work for you. So when it came time to send me back into the community for a work release program, they sent me to an inpatient drug program. And I spent the first 60, almost 90 days there explaining to the counselors and anybody that would listen that I didn't need to be there, that I had Jesus and it had changed my life.
Now, did you find Jesus in the jail?
Oh, yeah, jailhouse religion.
Okay. All right.
Absolute jailhouse religion, looking back. But, that contributes to my experience today that makes me much more understanding of other people's beliefs because,
sure.
John, it was just as real to me today as my atheism is to me today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And it's all about what someone believes, which is where I've come in my full circle in recovery. So, at about the 60 to 90 day mark of the inpatient treatment, we had what was called a marathon group in the old days, and it took them a couple of days, but they finally broke me down and got to the core of my issues, and that started the road to recovery. AA was a part of that treatment center. They came in and brought a meeting every twice a week, and then towards the end of the treatment cycle, before I was released to come home, graduating, quote unquote, we were allowed to go to outside meetings every day. So that's how I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I came home in August of 1990. By that time, I had been sober a little over a year and started attending meetings and never really did the deal, quote unquote. I was what was described in the big book as a classic two-stepper. I had a solid first step, and I shared my recovery with whoever wanted to listen, and touted AA from all the rooftops. Mm-hmm. But I never got a sponsor. I never joined a home group. I never worked the steps other than the first four that I did in treatment, 4 or 5. So it just was. I was a classic two-stepper, but it worked for me. It worked for me. I'd had such a horrendous bottom that, I at 33 years old, I was ready. I just never, now looking back, I realize that's also a very common age for addicts. Opium was my drug of choice, heroin. And for addicts, that's a very common age where they either get off the bus or they ride the bus into the sunset.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a very common age where where you get burnout, where you finally burn out and realize this isn't going to work for me. And I think that was contributed to it.
Yeah.
So, there were things going on in my life in the early 90s and early in recovery that were wonderful and I couldn't have achieved if I hadn't have been sober.
Mm-hmm.
I got a divorce upon returning from treatment in 90, and the court gave me full custody of my 2.5-year-old son. And here I went from someone who was 33 years old and couldn't take care of myself to having to take care of me and a 2.5. And so that became part of who I was for many years. I stayed sober, started going away from Alcoholics Anonymous, meaning meetings and things, probably in year 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
And from 1995 on, I probably went to 2 meetings a year, one to pick up my chip, and one just because I would wind up there with somebody or just drive by and pull in.
Right.
So recovery was still a part of my life. Everyone around me knew I was in recovery and knew I didn't drink and didn't drug. And I even named my company Heavenly Landscapes, which started a lot of conversations about recovery, and I could share my story because I was very adamant about that and very grateful.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward a few years and I go back to college as an adult. I start a business. I'm raising a son on my own and I'm having a lot of success and a lot of rewards, and things are going really, really well. And in 2005, which is 16 years later, I remarry, new wife, kid. My son at that time was ready to graduate high school. My business was flourishing, and I had gotten completely away from recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I had one person in my life who was still my best friend and has become a mentor in the program to me, that was in recovery. And frankly, other than that, the recovery was not on the front burner with me.
Okay.
And the lesson I learned there and the punchline there is that in 2006, my pediatrician of 15 years, not pediatrician, my general practitioner, who was my son's doctor also, but prescribed me a narcotic cough syrup.
Ah.
I had, knowing full well that I was in recovery and had gone over all that with him like we all should. I don't really blame him. It was my job, but the short version of the long story is that I had walking pneumonia in the middle of the summer.
Oh, wow.
And I had a company with 20 employees and didn't have the infrastructure to let it go and run on its own. And I just explained he wanted to put me in the hospital. And I said, I can't do that.
Right.
Give me something and I'll get up in the morning and be in bed by lunch. And he did. And I didn't even know it was a narcotic. I filled the prescription, took a dose, got in the truck and went back to work. But boy, 15 minutes later, I felt that glow and I knew exactly what it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the term that I affectionately describe it as is that, I had the bear hibernating in the cave for a long time.
Yep. Good description.
Yeah. And it didn't wake the bear up, but it poked.
Yep.
And what happened over a period of a year was I got sick a couple of more times, and there wasn't an immediate relapse. There wasn't immediate off the deep end. I took that prescription, of course, taking bigger doses than I needed because I'm such a big guy, not because I was an addict and wanted to get
right. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have 1 tablespoon. I probably need 3 of these. I'm a big guy. So I probably, so every time I got a cough or a sniffle, I ran in the office and got another prescription. Tussianex is what he was giving me. And each time, and John, each time I did it, the physical part of our addictive body, biological physical part, just increased.
God.
The subconscious cravings increased. Started thinking about it more, et cetera, et cetera. It took about a year. That was when I feel my relapse started, and I call my relapse officially starting in 2007, because that's when I went to the doctor for the first time and lied. All had chewed up my bottle, and I needed another prescription.
Yep.
And that slowly tumbled into finding out I could buy it online, to this working doctors for pain pills, and finally full relapse in spring of 2007 with back using heroin again.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in May of 2007, as part of the way I like to tell my story, is in May of 2007, I was 16 and a half years sober, business, family, college education, lots of friends, but I was back on the wagon again. I was back riding the addiction cycle.
Right.
It took 18 months, and in January of 2009, I checked into the local homeless shelter.
Okay.
Lost, we all know that story.
Yeah.
First went to family, second went to business, third went everything I owned. And the only thing that I had in my possession in January of 2009 was my truck. That didn't belong to me. It belonged to the bank. And I checked in. And I'd like to say that was a wake up, but it wasn't. I am one of those classic addict and alcoholics, exactly like our founders. I'm a hopeless addict and alcoholic, which it's been my experience, John, that makes our program easier to get.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. I always am amazed and admire the young people that come in, and people that have bad emotional episodes, but aren't of the variety of addict and alcoholic that I am.
Right.
Which is it's wonderful, but it just amazes me.
Yeah.
So in May of 2009, I got arrested for driving on a suspended driver's license. And couldn't even make a $75 bond, and stayed in jail for 3 weeks, dried out, got released, and literally waddled back here to the beach, to my sister's house. And she allowed me to come in and said, if you'll go to AA and stay sober, you can stay here. So that was June the 1st, or June 1st of June, 2009. And at that time, John, I owned 2 pair of shorts and a T-shirt. Was it. And I went to my first AA meeting up at the clubhouse. We have a big local clubhouse here at the beach. I don't go there a lot now. And obviously I was ready to do anything. This part of my story is very typical. I went to my first meeting. A fella shared against the wall. I didn't hear a word he said. It was just the rhythm of his voice and the assuredness of which he shared. Gave me comfort.
Yeah.
And I did the hardest thing I've ever done in Alcoholics Anonymous to this day. And that was, I walked over to that stranger with tears in my eyes, stuck my hand out, and I said, will you help me and be my sponsor? And he said, absolutely. Well, he turned out to be an absolute West Florida big book thumper which, looking back, was exactly what I needed.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was kind of a big book thumper for a long time, so I'm kind of glad I had that experience. But go ahead.
I know, I tried that shoe on too. It didn't work for me, but I tried it on because of what I knew at the time.
Yeah.
And it was what I needed, though. And just to give you an idea of the shape I was in, I was 360 pounds.
Oh, wow.
My blood pressure was 200 over 190.
Wow.
And I had sores on my legs. It was really an enlightening experience for me, who had never been a hardcore alcoholic, more of an addict, but a heavy drinker. That, I did drugs. I didn't pick up a drink until probably the last 6 months of my relapse. But, buddy, let me tell you, John, when I did, it was like putting lighter fluid on a burning fire. It just destroyed me.
Yeah. Good Lord.
It destroyed my immune system. It really, I was on the way out. So I was in very bad shape, and I couldn't think clearly. In June of 2009, I needed someone to tell me what to do and how to do it. So I spent the next 3 months riding a bicycle up to the clubhouse, and other meetings. I had no driver's license. It was suspended, and working the steps with him.
Yeah.
And he took me through them very slowly because, as he affectionately told me early on, he said, "Your dumbass isn't ready to do anything but go."
Yeah.
And he's right, because I just, I was in a fog.
Yeah. I think that's good advice in the beginning. I actually did the same thing. I had a really nice guy who's helped me out, and he said, I had asked him, should I be working the steps? He says, no, John, you just go to meetings. That's all you need to do right now. I said, okay.
Right. Yeah. And my personality is not one. I'm a very gregarious, outgoing person. So my personality is not one just to listen.
Yeah.
And he didn't tell me to shut up, but he did, he did say, no, we're not ready to work the steps for a while. And it took probably 5 months until we finished with step 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. You actually went through them quicker than I did.
Well,
I took years.
Yeah. Well, I understand that now that I'm working with others. That's an okay.
Yeah.
You know, the first part of my recovery after the relapse was just immersing myself in AA and the life of AA. I became a 3-day a meeting goer. Had no job. I had an inability to get a job. Had no transportation. All the normal things that we have in life. So AA basically became my life. Yeah. And about 4 months in, my sister came to me and said, it's time for you to get a job and move out. My husband's worried you're going to live here the rest of your life. And I was like, okay. So at that time, I probably wasn't ready, but with a lot of things in life, I was ready for more than I thought I was. Yeah. So I went out and finally found a job, which was very humbling, and humility was a big part of my early recovery that I'm grateful for. John, I went from a real egomaniac, typical materialistic American. Before I relapsed, it was all about what I had and who I was, not anything spiritual or to a very spiritual, non-materialistic way of life, and I'm grateful for it today. So I wound up as a helper on a lawn maintenance crew, taking care of the same houses that my company used to take care of.
I'll be darned.
So you want to talk about humility? Try ducking around yards so the customer doesn't see you, to come out. Hey, what happened? That's just part of my story. And I moved out and slowly got on my own. And I do want to tell a quick God story that's really funny. Okay. So when my sister tells me I've got to move, I'm sitting in a 7 a.m. meeting in September of 2009, 4 months sober, and I share that I've got to move out of my sister's house, and then I'm going to have to find a place to stay. And the couple sitting next to me says, after the meeting, we've got an upstairs that we were thinking about turning into a studio, and maybe we could put you in there. And I was like, oh. So I immediately, as soon as they walked away, I picked up the phone, John, and I called my sponsor, and I said, God has found me a place to live. Right? The moral of this story is I move in without, and within 2 weeks, it makes one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Look,
oh no.
She is mentally ill. Oh no. I think to this day is still institutionalized. Yeah. 5 years later, 6 years later, he is just, can't stay sober 2 hours. It was absolutely crazy. So a month later, when I walk down and try to pay my rent, and they're like, well, we're not sure. We don't know. Just get back with us next month. We're not sure. I'm like, do you want my money? Well, it was just, right? I walk out into the street. I call my sponsor and say, tell him, and he, of course, says what? Well, Glenn, I thought God found you that. So that was the beginning of getting out of the God business. Okay. And it was a great learning experience for me that I put in perspective later. But so I actually, my sponsor helped me find someone in the program who rented a room out in a house that had been sober for 20 years. And I moved in with him to the master bedroom and stayed there 5 years. It was a wonderful experience.
there's so much of your story that parallels mine. I stayed with my sister for 6 months. She made me leave. The day that I left was the same day that I got an apartment and a new job. I had my my car packed up with all my life's possessions. Went to work, and that day moved into an apartment.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's unique. It's amazing how much our stories always run parallel in some way, isn't it?
Yeah. And then I found a nice guy from my home group who had an apartment that he rented to me for like $200 a month. And I was there for like 7 years, and it was great. So,
well, I stayed 5 years, and during that 5 years, in my AA life, I continued with the original sponsor, probably for 9 months, almost 10. And he was smart enough to see, as he was taking me through the steps, that he was not going to be able to help me long term. And he said it, he told me earlier, and I didn't understand what he said, John. When we had a real hard time getting through step 3, first of all, but we did. And,
why is that? Is that because at this point you weren't believing in God, or you were losing that faith?
No, at that point I was trying to explain God.
Okay.
I was trying to explain an alternative, non-religious God that he didn't identify with all. He was a very cut and dried, which is what attracted me to him and made him so good for me at the time. Everything was black and white.
Right.
And a perfect example that he told me early on was, I drink Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I don't need to try Starbucks. I don't need to try. I drink Dunkin' Donuts coffee because it's good. And
all right.
That's how he was. And if you see him today, he's drinking Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
Well, he's got to try Starbucks, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, I'm a Starbucks addict, but that's enough. So, when we talked about step 3, the first time we tried to work through it, he told me that it was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard, and to go back and work on it some more, because I tried to explain to him how God was in the leaves, in the air, in everything. And he just said, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Well, so much for your own conception of a higher power.
Yeah, exactly. And he told me, he said, you're going to outgrow me, and that's going to be okay. Yeah. So about 9 months in, he was right. And I was actually on step 9 then. And I had made my list in step 8 by myself, because he really had kind of faded out of the picture. And I went and made a couple amends and totally screwed them up, because I didn't work with anybody on that. And I reached a point of, I went from a black and white sponsor to I needed a totally gray sponsor. I needed someone I could talk to. And I met a guy. I had met a guy the year before at a meeting. I attended a retreat in January of 2010 and asked him if he'd help me find another sponsor, and he walked me through how to do it. I had coffee with several guys and talked to them, and by the time a month went by, it dawned on me that he was sitting right in front of me. So he became my new sponsor. He just celebrated 43 years last month. Oh. He was an addictions counselor in the Navy for 30 years, and he was exactly what the doctor ordered. He was somebody who could hit all bases with me. And I still call him my sponsor to this day, though it's been my experience, if you truly do the deal, a sponsor is not what it is during the early years.
True. I agree with that.
And he actually had a brain tumor a year and a half ago. He survived and is in recovery and in remission, but he's not the same person.
Right.
I still pick him up and take him to a meeting once a week or every other week, and we still see each other around. But basically, he's not my go-to guy anymore.
Right.
And, my experience has been, if you do the deal the way I did, I have 10 go-to guys, and I go to people who have experience in whatever I'm going through that I need help with.
Yeah, that's how I am now, too.
Yeah. So we started working together, and by that time, I'm firing on about 5 cylinders of a 6-cylinder engine. I'm ready to go, and I've reached that AA stage of I'm ready to write the essay, turn it in, get my grade, and let's move on. Let's finish this thing. And he was very instrumental in teaching me through actions and holding me up that everything is a process and it never stops. And that's my experience with recovery today that I try to share with newcomers and people I'm working with. Recovery, like all things in life, is a process.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was just thinking about that. It is a process. I'm writing something about step 4, and I was thinking, you know, there are certain things that you have to experience and go through before you're ready to do that step. And there is definitely a process involved, it's pretty incredible. It's something, so a lot of it is more than, anything that we can think about or do. It's just things that happen to us that we have to kind of recognize. Anyway.
Yes, no, I agree.
It is a process.
And the process doesn't stop.
No.
That took a long time for me to see. So we worked through the steps, and you know, the best example I can give of the gift of patience that my sponsor gave me was, so, you know, when I started working with him, I had my little list, and I was like, okay, how do we do these amends? And, you know, and he was like, whoa. You know, well, let's just sit back and keep doing what we're doing and let this take care of itself.
So, Glenn, how did you get into the secular AA thing? And at this point, were you becoming an atheist, or were you? No.
Yeah. I'll fast forward for you real quick. What he taught me was just to wait, and the amends would come, and that was what happened. You know, I turned the corner in a grocery store 6 months later, and there was that person that had worried me the most, and I was able to make the amends, and that was the beginning of that process. So I continued to work with him and do the deal. For 5 years.
Okay.
I picked up my 5-year chip, and I was immersed in AA, just like I had been for 5 years, and I was completely miserable, John. I just had tried as hard as I could to go along and get along, as we hear, and tried to make something out of circumstances and things that happened. I tried to make it part of a higher power. It just didn't work for me.
Okay.
So there's a saying in AA, and I put it in the paper. I'm going to send the story I'm going to send you. You know, there's a saying around the rooms here. I don't know if you've heard it there. If you hear a popping sound when you pick your 5-year chip up, that's your head popping out of your ass.
I have not heard that one.
That's a pretty common saying around with old timers around this area. And that kind of resembles my experience. So in June, all 6 cylinders of my engine was hitting. You know, I had restarted my company. I had started a relationship. I had done a lot of things that, you know, I was back to a productive, full life. And I was miserable because I wasn't being authentic with myself or anybody else.
Yeah, I got there. I got that point.
God.
Yeah.
And so what was happening, and what happened between June and August, was it just got worse and worse. You know, I just got angrier and more isolated, and, you know, didn't hear anything good in the meeting. All I heard was what was bothering me. But I was.
So were you beginning to lose your faith, and you were afraid to talk about how you viewed things now? Is that what was happening?
Yeah, I wasn't. I had already lost my faith. I had become agnostic probably year 2, where, you know, it became a back and forth trying to explain things issue. But by the time I picked up my 5-year chip, you know, I knew that I didn't believe in these things, and that you know, it was my belief, not that I knew, which is very important. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I know. It's what I believe, and I knew I didn't. But I had no conception, and I was definitely in the closet. Is the answer to
Gotcha. Yeah, I was that too for a little while.
Yeah. There was a couple of friends that I shared with, and they were understanding, but they just really, you know, they didn't help me with my dilemma. So by August, it had gotten so bad that I was looking around to join some other fellowships or try out some other fellowships, SMART or whatever, you know, something different, because the big lesson that I learned when my relapse is that for me, I had to stay attached to a recovery program for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So, in the process of the summer also, I talked to several people, and I discovered that there was another WAF meeting here in town. It wasn't called a WAF meeting. It was just called Agnostics.
Okay.
And I started attending that in August when I found out about it. And it was through that meeting, one of the guys that was a member was actually Joe C. in Canada was his sponsor at one time.
I'll be darned.
And through him is how I found out about the convention.
Oh.
Yep. And so it wasn't until September that I even found out about the convention. And like I shared with you a little earlier, I had that surf trip all saved up for and planned, and I decided, let's go check this out. And I have a real good friend who's been sober since the 70s, who was willing to go with me, and we loaded up in November and off we went. And frankly, I showed up there in that. I was the angry atheist. Days I was just so freaking angry at everything and everybody, including
really.
Writing about this the last couple of days has really helped me put it into some kind of chronology and I showed up there not knowing what to expect, kind of apprehensive and alone. Biggest thing, John, is I had been walking around for more than just since I picked my 5-year chip up. I didn't feel a part of for probably a year before I picked my chip up, but it had really reached a tipping point. And, we showed up and we were greeted happily and given our packets. And, we went through the first day, and the first day is more of a blur than anything else. But let me tell you, brother, when I got in the van to go back to the hotel that night, I had that glow that you can't describe to anybody else that hasn't had it of, man, I wasn't alone anymore.
Yeah, that was an awesome experience. I relate.
Completely. There was one of the panels on spirituality or not spirituality.
I was at that.
Yeah, and I loved the Marine explanation of esprit de corps.
Yeah.
And that was my experience. But, it was a spiritual experience for me. I mean, I went back to the hotel and it all melted away. No different than the newcomer that comes in and finds out they're not alone. It all melted away, John.
So I love that convention because I was at that point trying to figure out how to be an atheist in AA. And you know what? There's all kinds of different ways you can do it. And I was like, man, I'm still like that. I'm like, wow, I'm very spiritual, and then I'm very scientific. I'm a lot of different things, but
right. No, I agree, and I agree, and I understand. And for me, it wasn't about coming out yet. That was a process that started when I came home. For me, it was, I'm alone. I can't be, I was real fearful of my recovery. So for me, it was more of a great learning experience, but it was just more of an eye-opening spiritual experience for me. And so, I did several of the workshops. We spent every minute, except for one day we went out and I showed him the Ferris wheel and the other things in Santa Monica. But other than that, we spent all the time at the convention. And one of the workshops that I just kind of walked into, I hadn't really planned to go to, was the How to Start a Meeting workshop.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And, I just picked up that paperwork and I listened, and it wasn't a big, I need to start a meeting. It was just part of what I did. It was more, when I got home, of course, just on fire when I got home. Now I'm on fire because I know I'm not alone, and I know that, there's others and a lot of other things. I ran into the Tuesday night meeting that was already here and just, spent 20 minutes. They couldn't get enough hearing about the convention and sharing their books. And a little sidebar, if Joe listens to this, we use Joe C's Agnostic Musings as our reading for those meetings now, which I brought that book back.
Yeah. We use that too every once in a while.
Yeah, isn't it right? So, and we use a format that one of the San Francisco groups forwarded me. The convention was very instrumental in what I'm doing in recovery and with meetings today. So, I come back in November. I'm on fire. And then the coming out process started. Now, before that, John, the year before I came back from the convention, I was that guy that shared, I didn't believe, but I shared it cynically and judgmentally, like you people are stupid.
Yeah.
That, wasn't anything positive or constructive about my shares, because I was just so angry and alone. So when I came back, I started sharing the joy, and I started sharing the, wow, this, there is a lot of groups and stuff. Another friend of mine in the program asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I want to start a meeting. and he said, I've got a place. And so then I had to luckily, I just went to the paperwork I had and worked with the guys from the Tuesday night group. And on December the 13th, we started a meeting. We had our first meeting December the 13th of 2015. There was 4 of us we got the coolest. We meet in an art gallery here at the beach.
Oh, wonderful. Cool.
Phenomenal. And, our first meeting was really just 3 or 4 guys that, couple I meditate with, and another guy from another meeting, and one person from the Tuesday night meeting. And that's how we got started. The next step that after we met a few times and we talked about what we wanted to do, which was spread the word. And from the very beginning, John, we were very careful about we wanted to be inclusive and not exclusive. And that's a very hard thing to do.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. It's a tough balance sometimes.
It's a very hard balance. It's a very tough balance, and it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
And we are typical, I believe, as far as we do have people in the group that don't want to be inclusive, but they go along with the group conscience. And so what we did is we did typical spread the word actions. We put flyers out. I started announcing it at every meeting I was at. I even went to meetings that I didn't enjoy and announced it.
Right.
And it took about 6 months. And all of a sudden, we look up in June, and we've got 15 people.
Wow.
And we've got probably 10 regulars. And,
yep.
And that's when the second phase of my growing experience connected to the meeting goes. That's when I realized, we need to make this a meeting. Let me backtrack real quickly, though.
Okay.
When I went to one of the big things that they recommended at the workshop at the International Convention was that if you were going to start a meeting, to make sure you registered with GSO.
Right. Correct.
Get a number. And it was through that process that when I did it, they sent me that huge
That's right.
information.
Right.
Where I'm like, wait a minute, man, I just wanted to get a number.
Yeah.
So I told me to get a number. Well, 6 months later, I understood why. We began the process of, are we going to be a group or a meeting? And if we're going to be a group, we need to be a part of the service structure.
Good for you. Good for you.
Absolutely. And so that process started probably 6 or 7 months ago. And since then, we are completely immersed in service work. We now have, an intergroup rep. I'm the GSR. We have an alternate GSR. We have a treasurer. We don't really have a secretary. We just all pitch in with our news at the beginning of the meeting if we have anything to talk about. And we finally, we're taking what I consider to be the next step. June the 1st, we now have a meeting that we're going to carry into the hospital here once.
Fantastic. That's something I want to do too for our group.
Yeah, and with the caveat that we're carrying it in with our format.
Great.
So during that process, not only was it rewarding, I've learned a tremendous amount about the way AA works, and have become a real proponent of working within the system, not outside or against.
Me too. Absolutely. Yep.
Because that's where the change is going to come.
You're right. And it's possible too. I really believe that. When I go to my area assembly here in Missouri, I'm the only open atheist of the whole place. But they're very, very accepting of us. They want to be inclusive, and I have no problem working with them at all. I think if anybody doesn't like me or whatever, they don't really come up to me and tell me. But for the most part, it seems to be working pretty well.
And I am going to echo your experience. And when I started this meeting when we started to get ready to immerse into intergroup and other things, I did it with trepidation because of some of the stories, horror stories that I heard. And as you well know, Atlantic Beach, Florida, which is in Jacksonville, Florida, we're a bit in the Bible Belt here.
Yes. Yep, you sure are.
But my experience is just like yours. I won't use the word we've been welcomed with open arms, but we have been absolutely welcomed. Yeah. We haven't had any pushback at the intergroup level. at the district level or at the region level. Or
neither way.
None. More than that, our message has been really accepted quite well. We've had people referred to our group. And here's the big news on this end. The state convention will be here next year. Okay. 2017.
It's going to be in Jacksonville?
Yes.
Okay.
I reached out to the chairman of the state convention and approached her about doing an atheist freethinkers agnostic workshop.
Oh.
And she has said yes.
Yeah.
So.
God, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and
that's exactly what we need to be doing. All the groups around the country need to be doing that, I think.
Right. And, she, and that's a credit to her more than it is anything else, that she is willing to take the pushback. She says there'll be pushback, but that, that she, quote, said it's time, it's time. So she's going to give us a Saturday slot in the afternoon, which is peak time. And we've settled on the title, We Agnostic and Freethinkers in AA is going to be
good deal.
Shop.
Oh man, you're inspiring me to do something like that. Mm-hmm. We have a convention in Missouri every year. It's in July. Mm-hmm. That'd be kind of interesting to do something like that. I think they'd be open to it. I mean, here in Missouri, we're kind of Bible Belt too, at least in the southern part of the state. Right. But they're pretty accepting of me. I mean, that's the thing about AA is they really go out of their way to give the minority, special attention.
Right.
And they do really want to be inclusive. So I've not had,
Right.
I don't know, we'll see.
I haven't had any, I've had some negative, but I've had no confrontations, and I've definitely had no horror stories like before.
No.
Our intergroup listed us in the Where and When. We're listed on the internet. We've had no pushback whatsoever. And that's just been our experience. I know that that's not the case in all places. Before we run out of time, let me share a little bit about how our group process.
Yeah.
So we start in December. We started December of 14, and for the first 4 or 5, 6 months even, it was just a lot of venting and a lot of God bashing, AA bashing. What's wrong with AA?
Jesus Christ. We've been through that too.
Well, and I was part of it. I mean, here, I'm, out of the closet now, and I'm fucking angry. Excuse my language. I'm angry and proud,
Yeah.
And I've looked back at it now and learned that is part of the process.
It is
part of the process.
Yep.
And slowly, in its own way, over the next year, it has now become a very mature, intimate group where people feel very comfortable sharing, deep things that are going on with them. And we've built a pretty strong core, and the core is a good mix of, we've got some older guys in their 60s and 70s that have got 30, 25 years. Mm-hmm. We've got our intergroup rep is a young 26-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And we've got a couple of, 2-3 year guys. Mm-hmm. And so our group has really matured, like I said, and, that's represented best, I think, by our commitment to service work.
Yep.
And then, the last thing about our meeting is now when we get the newcomer in there who shares for 15 minutes at their first meeting, and it's just like we were when we opened up, we don't try to change it or whatever. We understand it.
Yes. Yeah.
And let me share this story real quickly, because this just happened 2 weeks ago in our group, and it was a great learning experience and growth spurt for our group. I talked to the guy this morning about sharing it, and he said he was okay with that.
Okay.
So we had one of our core members come in 2 weeks ago, and he was sitting there a little apprehensive and tootling and messing around with his paper, and then, and finally he shared, and he said, I've through a medical miracle, I've found God. And I'm really worried that you guys don't want me here anymore because of it. And we had been sharing on a completely different topic related to the reading of the morning. Mm-hmm. And he went on to explain what had happened. And, given credit to his story, he had one of those inexplicable medical.
Yeah.
And he's an older guy, and it was from Mayo Clinic. So, I mean, it wasn't like he went to some quack who said you're cured or whatever. But anyway.
Right.
the point that I wanted to share, or the positive that I wanted to share, was the meeting turned on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
People that had already shared again, and we all, shared to him, absolutely not. You are welcome here, and we want you here, and the only thing that's changed is your belief is different than.
That's right.
And it didn't really dawn on us until this week, which is 2 weeks later. But it was a real growing experience for us. But one of the things we're going to probably try to do in the coming months is to make sure that we reach out to not believers, but that people know that it's not a closed meeting.
Yeah.
So it was a really neat experience. Didn't affect my beliefs whatsoever.
No.
But he's a really fortunate guy. It was a very spiritually grow. It was a spiritual growth moment in our group.
Sure, and it's a really important thing. It's something that our group is still going to be working through, because we have some believers. Most of us are atheists. But even within the atheists, you have like some people that are super, super spiritual, and some people that want absolutely nothing to do with any spirituality. And it's like, we really have to learn to respect each other's differences and just,
Yeah.
Because
to tie things up here, because we're not there for us.
Right. That's right.
And that has been our experience now. We are there for that newcomer. We are there for that guy that comes in and vents for 15 minutes and realizes that he has a place to go.
Yeah. You're right.
And that has become our primary purpose. That was the last step, not the last, but it's the next step in our growth as a group, that we've reached a point where, hey, we need to spread this message. Mm-hmm. We need to go carry a meeting somewhere, and, I won't say it saved my life, but if you look up the definition of epiphany, the convention in Santa Monica, was an epiphany for me.
Yeah, let me see.
Because the third definition in the dictionary for an epiphany is a moment of sudden revelation or insight. Nothing religious. Nothing.
Right.
I had an epiphany in Santa Monica, and it helped keep me on a positive track in recovery.
God, me too. It really did.
It did. And that's what our meeting's there for. Is that guy that we can help. And really, like I said, we started with 4, and we've had probably 2 other guys that were atheists before they ever got to us. And one of them's a typical AAer that's atheist and doesn't need to tell anybody and doesn't care in AA. He just uses the good orderly direction where the word God is, and it doesn't bother him, which irks the shit out of me.
Yeah.
So, a couple of them are those kind of guys, but the rest of them, which would be anywhere from 6 to 10 people on any given Saturday, they're all people who found us because they were unhappy in regular meetings.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we find too.
So, things are good here in Atlantic Beach. We're moving forward. We haven't found the reason or ability to start a second meeting. Probably will come probably next year sometime. We'll wait and see. But, we're also looking forward to coming to the convention. We're going to try to drum up a group. We're trying to get commitments by the end of June, 1st of July, so we can make some reservations.
That's cool.
And I've contacted them about, surprise, volunteering to run the workshop on starting a meeting.
Oh, neat. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. Well, I think that, 2 things. I think that would be an easy, natural thing for me to do because I've much recently and it's fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And second, the other thing that came out of doing this was I've learned that there's a huge difference in being a group and being a meeting.
Very good. Very good. There really truly is. And I guess it's that connection to the service structure.
It's absolutely the connection to the service structure. And there's it's important because as I've shared with you and we seem to agree, the change has to come from within.
Yeah.
And that's the change that's going to last. And my experience, which sounds a lot like yours, is GSO and at the service level, they're open to that change.
They are.
They are open to that change, and they realize it. It's an outlier experience that I hear of somebody coming up and doing the old, you can't get sober without God, or that is the exception to the rule for us.
That's right. Those are just individual people.
Right. It is not. It is not the rule at the service level of AA. We have accepted, it's been a very positive experience for us. So, we're going to keep doing what we're doing here. And
I really enjoyed hearing about this, and I'm going to go down to Jacksonville sometime and go to one of your meetings.
Well, we meet in a nice little art gallery 3 blocks off the ocean. It's not a bad spot, John.
That sounds beautiful.
And I look forward to seeing you in Austin. You're definitely going to be there, right?
I will absolutely be there.
That's almost driving distance for you, isn't it?
It is. I'm going to drive. Actually, a bunch of us are talking about getting a van or a bus or something and going down together. But it's like a 10-hour drive.
Yeah, my partner, the girl I live with, she's not in the program or even has issues. She's so intrigued. She's going to come with me. We're looking forward to it. Like I said, we're going to try to get a group and see if we can either travel as a pack or make our reservations as a pack. But we're going to do that real soon.
That'll be fun.
All right, brother. Well, listen, I've got to be somewhere.
Okay.
Anything else that I can share?
No, I think that covered it, and I really appreciate it very much. Your story about the group is inspiring to me. I think it will be to a lot of other people too. So you go out there and you have yourself a good day there, Glenn. Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. We'll be back soon enough with another interesting conversation, another interesting guest. I hope you enjoyed this program. Just know that we'll be back again very soon. Until then, take care and be well.